Namaste everyone. So this is going to be the outline of the talk. We'll have a three-part series. So in the first part, we are just going to look at. Okay, in the first part, we are going to be looking at three stories, followed by the key four problems that we are going to be looking at today. The second part is going to be about Indian knowledge systems. I'll introduce what the Indian knowledge systems are. What are the key things that we can actually use today from IKS. And the third part is going to be about the newly formed organization. How exactly we are planning on making IKS useful, and we'll end with Q&A. So this is our first story. It's about cargo cult. So this story is actually very interesting. So back in World War II time frame, American military personnel, right? They landed on a bunch of Pacific islands. They were using these islands as bases because the Pacific Front War was with the Japanese, right? And there are not many land area there. So suddenly what happened was the natives in these islands were exposed to 20th century technology, even though they were still in Stone Age, right? And for about 3 years, during essentially the war years, the native peoples of these islands, they had access to all the 20th century, goods like, cargoes, essentially like chocolate, biscuit, and all these things. And right after the war ended, the American military left, and so their access to the cargo stopped. So a few years later, when sociologists visited these islands, they discovered a very interesting phenomenon across all these different islands, right? The common features of the new religion, so to speak, that had emerged in all those islands spontaneously was that they would clear a rectangular piece of plot, they'll make it perfectly level so that airplanes can land those plots. They'll even draw lines, and in some of these islands they even had priests with red sticks, doing all these motions, right? Like aircraft marshals trying to get the planes to land on those lands, right? Like the land that they've cleared. And the objective, the reason, and they would even construct toy airplanes like this with whatever material that they would have in these islands, right? And this phenomenon was seen across many islands that was really separated by thousands of miles sometimes, right? They had no ways of communicating between each other, and this collective phenomenon is called cargo cult. And the key thing over here, or key takeaway for us, is that this is a perfect example of shallow imitation without understanding, right? The reason that the natives were trying to do all these things is so that if they do these things, they are hoping to get access to those cargo again, right? And that's the key thing over here, right? This is a perfect example of, like I said, shallow imitation without deep understanding. And you can be sure that whenever there is this kind of shallow imitation or dumb imitation, as I might sometimes call it, they are not going to definitely have access to whatever they are looking for. So that's the first story. Does anybody know who this person was? R.K. Shanmugam Shetty? This person? Anybody? So yeah, not surprising. So this was actually, he was a big guy in his time. He was Free India's first finance minister, right? And he was a big guy in his day. And you can see him wearing a wig here, right? There is a story, interesting story behind the wig. So the story wigs existed for a long time, but it was popularized starting in France, like around the time of Louis XIV, so-called Sun King. And he had syphilis, right? Unfortunately, so he started losing a lot of his hair. And because of that, right, he shaved his head and started wearing wigs. And then the French aristocrats saw this, they shaved off their perfectly good hair, started wearing wigs. And then, the rest of Paris copied it, and Paris, was the capital of fashion apparently. So the rest of Europe copied it, then Britain copied it, and obviously Indian elites also copied it. That's the story behind this wig. So the reason, we are seeing this story today is to kind of disabuse of this notion that cargo cult imitation happens only with those, Pacific Islanders. It happens with all of us. In fact, the hairstyle that I'm wearing today, it actually starts with Peter Alexeyevich, or Peter the Great of Russia, because he didn't like long wigs. He cut off his wigs to make it look like the hair that I'm wearing today. And so I'm a cargo cult guy too. We all are, right? So that's the reason for this second story. So now we are moving on to the third story. This story is about a character called Kunta Kinte in a book called Roots by author Alex Haley. And the character is actually based on Alex Haley's, Gambian ancestor who was born around 1750. So what happens to Kunta Kinte is actually very sad. So Kunta Kinte is, minding his own business in a Gambian forest, and he's just captured like an animal, transported in a terrible way across the Atlantic, and sold as a slave in the US. During his slavery, Kunta Kinte tries many times to escape, but he's still, captured every time and brought back, right? And then over a period of time, he kind of, grows up and, grows into his middle age. And at that time, he's thinking to himself, and then he realizes that, hey, I'm even thinking to myself in English, which is the language of my captors. I'm not even thinking to myself in my native language. That's when he realizes the depth of his slavery, right? He's not only physically enslaved, he's also mentally enslaved, right? When I read this book 20 years ago, that's when I realized I was Kunta Kinte too. Because, I was intellectually enslaved, because English to this day is the best language in which I can read, write and speak. All the other languages, Indic languages that I do know a bit more of, right? It's not zero, but it is nowhere near English. So I'm Kunta Kinte too. And in fact, in a way, I'm worse than Kunta Kinte because he never denied his enslavement, right? He never had the opportunity. But I was unaware of my own slavery, intellectual slavery till that point in time. And in a sense, we are all are Kunta Kinte, because even today, right, most of India and Indians, we are communicating within ourselves in English, the language of our colonizers. So the point of these three stories is to illustrate two deep-rooted problems in India and in the Hindu community. The first problem is the phenomena of cargo cult, right? Just dumb copying that we are doing, mindless copying. The second one is this phenomena of intellectual enslavement, right? We need to be intellectually free to be able to do anything meaningful. So those two deep root causes are causing the following four problems that I think are more apparent. I think more of us are recognizing. The first problem is the problem of passing on our heritage. A lot of Hindu parents would really like to pass on their heritage to their kids, but they don't know how, right? They themselves are clueless. So then, how do they pass it on? That's the first problem. The second problem is a total lack of pull from a lot of the kids, right? So earlier generations, might have followed tradition just out of respect and shraddha, but our kids will not, right? They are a lot more curious, they have a lot more options. So unless we can answer their questions convincingly, they are not going to follow traditions just for the sake of following it, right? That's the second problem. The third one is a little bit more subtle, so I'm going to use, 2 or 3 slides to explain. So here I'm talking about systematic disadvantages, right? So I need to first define those terms. So you see the kid, on the right here, he's dressed perfectly for running, right? Whereas the kid on the left, he's dressed in a school uniform. He's not dressed for running, right? Just if we assume that the two kids are equally talented, which kid do you guys think is going to win a race? That's obviously, right? The kid on the right is going to win, yeah? And that is what I mean by systematic disadvantage, right? So in this case, the disadvantage is easy to see, it's visible. So it's easy to fix also. But some of the disadvantages that I'm going to be talking about are intellectual disadvantages, right? Not so easy to see. First, they're even difficult to diagnose in the first place, to recognize. And even more difficult to fix. Even if you know it, recognize it, right? It's even more difficult to fix. For example, our entire education system, right, is German in origin, right? And all it takes is for you to think for a minute. The word kindergarten itself, right, G-E-R-T-E-N, the spelling itself gives it away. It's a German word for children's garden. And the same thing, the first modern PhD was awarded, research-based PhD was awarded in University of Berlin. And so the entire system was German. And if you think about it, a German system designed for Germans. Actually, it was Prussia back then, but I'm going to make some approximations. So the German system was designed by Germans 200 years ago, was copied by the Europeans, then copied by the British and copied by us, right? So in that sense, we are much worse than cargo cults, right? So now you might actually tell me that, hey, how come I never recognize this disadvantage? Or maybe it's not too much of a factor, right? So you need to know, if it is a problem, you might agree, but you might not agree that it's really a significant problem. So I want to kind of take a quick detour to demonstrate how big a problem it is. So there is a computer science concept called Backus-Naur form. It's called BNF. So you don't have to know anything about the computer science concept itself. All you need to know is that it's a very fundamental concept in the design of programming languages, right? Not in writing programs, but designing those programming languages. And as far back as 1967, scholars in that area, this is, people in computer science will recognize ACM. Scholars in that area recognize that Panini did the exact same thing. He invented the exact same thing 2500 years ago, right? 2500 years ago. But even today, when kids are taught in computer science classes BNF, Panini's name is never mentioned once. The scientists Backus and Naur are obviously mentioned, their contribution is recognized, but Panini is not even mentioned once. So think about it this way, right? If you win a running race by like 200 miles or like 2 hours, right? That's the magnitude of gap here. You win a race by miles and miles gap between you and the second guy, but you still don't win the race. You are still not recognized. How would you feel? That's the magnitude we are talking about here, right? If a 2500 year head start doesn't give you the credit that you deserve, then what will? So the point over here is that the disadvantage that I'm talking about is not trivial. It's very significant. It's not easy to overcome. And this is also not an isolated case, right? I can give you dozens and dozens of examples. Even in this presentation, you're going to see at least a couple more. And at this point, you might, legitimately come back to me and then say, hey, this might be an academic disadvantage, right? If I'm not going to be a researcher, maybe it's not a problem. Good point, but unfortunately, that's not true. Because the thing is, all you have to do is to take any random science, math, or philosophy book. You can actually test this out, right? It can be a kids' school books, or it can be any amateur books in these areas. You'll see the following pattern. There will be a Greek guy, and I mean a guy, literally a Greek guy, who is supposed to have started some work 2500 years ago. Then it will directly jump to Europe of 16th and 17th century, right? One big jump. And then again it will talk about more guys, right? More European guys. As if nobody did anything worthwhile before Greece, nobody did anything worthwhile in the time period between, right? That systematic Eurocentrism has a massive negative impact on all our kids. If all they get to see are great things done by European males, how do you expect them to have a positive self-image? How do you expect them to, look at our culture in a positive light, right? That's the problem. So it affects all of us, not just academics. And just in case you might think, again you might come back to me and then say, hey, maybe this is just a new problem that you identified. Unfortunately, that is also not the case. There are these two books, there's a lot of scholarly literature in this area. These are just two of my favorite books. The book on the left, right, it talks about the impact of the two colonizations India has gone through, Islamic colonization and the British colonization. And the essential summary of the book is that the impact that these two colonizations have had on us is to deny us the fruits of our own heritage to us. We are basically no longer able to understand even our own heritage. Right? We might use the words ahimsa, satyam, this, that, and so on, but our use is very hollow. We hardly understand the words we are using and we are talking about. And the book on the right is actually a very recent book. It's very timely too. It does an amazing job. It basically, consists of two separable parts, so to speak. The first part talks about how one guy, James Mill, he had this very extremely racist Hindu-phobic book, in the early 1800s called History of Hindu India or something like that, or British India. And that book, it's a very, very racist book. If you read any part of it, you will cringe about how racist it is, right? And how essentially that one person's negative image of India goes all the way down till today, and is basically the source material for all the school books that your kids, use today in schools. Not just that, even in the media, right? Everything. How Hinduism is taught in schools, how it is looked at in media, across the board, right? Just that one guy's negative view. And then the second part of the book talks about detailed examples, starting from elementary school all the way till college, about the massive negative impact that it has on American children and how much they are suffering just because they are Hindu. So just because we are here in the US, you cannot assume that we have escaped the impact of colonialism. It is still affecting all of us to this day, right? So that's essentially the third problem. So our kids have a systematic and significant disadvantage that we cannot ignore. And the fourth problem, I'll illustrate with a very quick short story. Let us say you have this person, right? He works very hard. 10 years later, he is about, is very successful and rich and has a sports car, right? Now, what would you like your kids to imitate, right? Would you like your kid to copy what the successful guy did to become successful, right, by working hard? Or do you want your kid to, copy this guy's, sports car dress? This guy even has a fancy helmet, right? But all he has in reality is a broken bicycle, right? Is there anybody here who would like their kids to be like this? Yeah, of course, right? We all would like our kid to be like this. But the problem is, how do you get your kids to understand this, right? How do you get your kid to do deep copying, right? That's the fourth problem. So with that, the summary is that, heritage matters. Without roots, one cannot grow tall or go far. Narrative matters. We need to own our story. Right now, it's owned by the Europeans or Americans. We need to own our story. We need to define who we are. This is a fundamental right, and we need to have the right to tell our story. And our kids have significant and systematic disadvantage. This is not imaginary. You cannot brush it aside. This is not unreal. Just because you might not be familiar with it, but this is very real. And the final thing is that intellectual independence matters. It's the key thing for doing any innovation in this knowledge economy. If you cannot think independently, you cannot innovate, then you won't be surviving the knowledge economy. The key question now for us is, yeah, fine, all these problems exist, let's say. How do we address this? And the assumption of this talk is that we can address all these problems with IKS. But before we can judge the merit of that kind of argument or even answer that question, we need to first understand what IKS is, right? That's going to be the second part. So IKS is a massive, massive ocean, right? To summarize it in a single sentence, we can say it is a sum total of all curated knowledge produced by all our ancestors over the many thousand years, at least 5,000 years of documented history, right? And this is one of those slides where I've made horrible approximations, so any experts here, please excuse me. I've had to kind of make a call to give an overview. So IKS, you can kind of broadly divide it into literary, non-literary sources. And non-literary, would have things like oral traditions, folklore, food sciences, arts and architecture and things like that. Under literary, we are blessed with many, many languages, including Sanskrit, and many regional languages also, which have very, very rich literature traditions. So all those things come under the literary branch. And here again, I'm making major approximations here. I've just included all these major sources of knowledge, which themselves can be classified under basic sciences, applied sciences, humanities, and mantras, yagas, and so on. Under basic sciences, we have things like Ganita and Jyotisha. Applied sciences, we have things like military sciences, Shilpa, and then Krishi or agriculture, metallurgy, and things like that. Under humanities, we have public administration, Arthashastra, linguistics, and so on. And finally, under mantras and yagas, we have mantropasana and puja vidhis and agama shastra and so on. Whenever we talk about Sanskritam literature, right, most people immediately only think of this part of the knowledge tree, right? But as you can obviously see, it's a small fraction of the entire literature that we have. So it is unfair to say whole of Sanskritam literature or whole of Indic literature is just puja and stuff like that, right? That's obviously not the case. So I'm not saying that they are not important. All I'm saying is they are not exclusively the content, right? There is a lot more to Indic literature than just pujas and agamas and things like that. Moving on. So here's a fun exercise for all of you. So I will take 2 or 3 seconds per line. Can anybody guess which language the first line is? Very good guess. What about the second line? Very good. Third line? Gujarati, Sanskrit, good guesses, okay. And fourth line? This line. Great guess, okay. And then fifth line? Sorry? Bengali and then Odia. Okay, great guesses. Okay, then sixth? Thai, actually, that's right, okay. And the last one? Urdu Arabic, perfect, yeah. Unfortunately, the answer is Sanskritam. so all these scripts, right? They are all saying Purushaya Tubhyam Namaha, right? And here again you see the same thing in Devanagari script and Roman script, right? So the point of this slide is to demonstrate the difference between language and script, right? This is a key point that most of us miss. And the fact is that the script develops fairly late in the history of a language, very, very late. Very concrete example is how, Tamil and Malayalam, they were identical not too long ago, right? Maybe 1500 years max, right? And if you look at the scripts, they're very different, right? So scripts are very, very recent. And let me just tell you the full answer. This is indeed Sanskritam using Kannada script, Sanskritam using Tamil Grantha, Sanskritam using Kashmiri Sharada script, and this is Gujarati Modi script. This is Tibetan script. The reason this slide is there, you'll see it in the next slide. This is Tibetan script. This is Thai, as somebody mentioned, and this is indeed Arabic. Right. So with that, let's move to the. I wanted to give everybody a feel of how vast IKS is, right? So what you see here is Tibetan monastery and its library, right? It's almost 950 years old monastery. It's in Tibet, and it is reputed to have 84,000 manuscripts, right? So each little box that you see there is a manuscript. Like that means one book, right? Something like that. And obviously they are not using Devanagari script, right? They are using Tibetan script. So whenever from now on I mention Sanskritam or Sanskrit, I mean the language, not the script, right? Those two are unfortunately tied in our head. We need to disconnect those two. They are not the same. So this is a massive library, right? As you can see, but this is a tiny, tiny fraction of the total amount of knowledge that we have. This pie chart, you see the blue sliver there? That's the total number of Greek and Latin manuscripts combined. All your Homer's Odyssey, Iliad, everything, single thing you've heard about Socrates, Plato, all those things combined is there in that tiny sliver. It includes all the Greek and Latin Bibles, everything, universe, right? Of that. And you see that second part there, the orange thing. That part is the cataloged Sanskritam work. So by cataloged, all I mean is that okay, this work belongs to this author and this is the title, this is the subject, and that's it. Nobody has actually even done a deep dive in it, right? Cataloged work is already 3.5 million, right? And the thing is, there's almost 27 million uncatalogued work, right? That's the magnitude we are talking about here, right? If 84,000 looks like this, imagine all these things. All these things are hidden, like essentially there all over India, right? In different scripts that you saw in the previous slide. And this doesn't even include the manuscripts in all the regional languages of India. Every single regional language, right, old regional language, has its own source of manuscript. That's not even included here. That's the corpus we are talking about here, right? It's a massive, massive list. Now for this talk, right, we actually wanted to give a sampler, almost a dozen IKS topics, right? Actually, I don't know if this is visible. Can everybody see this?
You may have to walk them.
Okay. Actually, maybe can we try turning on one of the lights? I mean, turning off. Yeah. The back one. Yeah. Okay. Still okay. So actually, it might take me too much time. So let me just classify it as philosophy, health, STEM, and linguistics, right? And then we realize it is too much content for 1 hour. So today we are just going to sample 5 topics. Ganita, Vijnana, Panchakosha. So I'll explain that now when we come to it. Ganita is mathematics, Vijnana is science, approximately. Panchakosha is a health framework, Sanskritam, Sanskrit, and then sustainability. We are just going to touch upon these topics. So please, I just wanted to stress here, whatever we are going to look at here is a microscopic fraction of the tip of the iceberg, right? That's how small a portion we are going to look at today. So with that, let's look at our first topic, Ganita or mathematics. So in the current system, right, we start with algebra, then go to geometry. That's how kids are taught all around the world, right? Whereas in Ganita, we do the exact opposite. We start with geometry, then go to algebra. The reason is geometry is simply more intuitive, right? And because of its visual pattern, that's also how historically the subjects evolved. And you might say, so what, right? The answer is that it has a profound impact on the kids, right? First is that you'll be able to teach kids Ganita at a much younger age, and so kids can get proficient at higher level mathematics much earlier, and also they'll have a deeper understanding. So let me illustrate with an example. So I'm sure we are all familiar with this identity: a plus b the whole square equals a square plus b square plus 2ab. The way this would be proven or showed introduced to a kid in Ganita is using this visual proof. So this square is of big square, outside square is of size a plus b. So obviously its area is a plus b the whole square. And if you look at it, the bigger square is actually composed of four smaller shapes, with the smaller one a square, the b square, and then two ab's. And that's it. Any kid who looks at this one, it's going to get it right away, right? And it's going to have two advantages. First, the kid is not going to forget this for life, right? Because once you see something visually, you're not going to forget it. Second, which is more important, is that the kid will now be able to generalize it. So if suddenly if a kid is asked what is a plus b plus c plus d the whole squared, kid can easily draw another picture just like that, and then literally look at the squares and all the shapes, and then write a square plus b square plus c square plus d square, and so on and so forth, right? And this ability to generalize and this ability to understand the fundamentals deeply is the most important skill you could have in innovation, right? If you want your kids to innovate and actually survive in the current knowledge economy, and it's going to be more and more like that in the future, you have to use deeper ways like this, right? Now, many such proofs, visual proofs are there in Jeshadeva's Yukti Bhasha, right? So now you might come back to me and say, hey, no, that is rather simple math. Can you give me another example, right? And this slide is primarily for that. So what you see here is called Meru Prasthara, right? And you can see this kid here doing Abhishekam to a Mahameru, and they basically are the same. And Meru Prasthara is explained in detail in Pingalacharya's work called Chanda Sastra, which is 2200 years old, right? It's called Pascal's triangle, and Pascal did his work in the 1700s, and this is yet another example where you win a race by 2000 plus years and you still don't get credit, right? The other interesting thing about this work is that this also introduces binary math, right? It's actually fascinating. So the reason binary math comes into Chanda Sastra, which is phonetics, is that all Indic languages have the short vowel a and then long vowel a, right? And those get used as zeros and ones, and they needed to figure out how to fill a particular gap. Let's say you have a 3 matra or 3 syllable gap in a poetry, how many ways of filling it is there, and so on. That's where the binary arithmetic comes, and that's yet another example. George Boole, it's called Boolean number system. George Boole lived in 1800s. Another example of somebody winning the race by 2200 years and still not getting the credit. And so now the history aside, let me just jump to the core mathematics part of it. So I want to just illustrate two uses of this Meru Prasthara. One is, let's say you want to get a plus b to the power 4, let's say, right? And this one is simply a lookup table. So all you have to do is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you just have to go to that row. The answer is 1 a power 4 plus 4 a cube b plus 6 a square b square plus 4 a b cube plus b power 4. That's it. And this holds true for all values of n. Doesn't matter the size, right? That's one use of Meru Prasthara. The second use is combinatorics. So combinatorics is an advanced branch of mathematics, and it's also computer science, you can say. And in fact I use it in my research pretty regularly. Meru Prasthara can be used to answer combinatorics questions like this. Let's say you have 4 coins. How many ways of getting 2 heads are possible, right? You do the same thing. You again go to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there is one way of getting 4 heads, 4 ways of getting 3 heads and 1 tail, and then 6 ways of getting 2 heads and 2 tails. So the answer to the question is 6. And that's it. Again, another lookup table operation, right? So these are just 2 examples of how you use Meru Prastara. So with that, the key point I wanted to convey is Ganita is not just easier to learn, but it's far more fundamental, right? You actually can understand it deeper, and then you'll be able to innovate with it. So that's the key point I wanted to convey with these 2 slides. So next, we will next look at Vijnana, right? This is the second of our 5-part sampler. So in Vijnana, in the West, religion and science were pretty much always at loggerheads with each other, right? Because the religion relied fully on the word or book of God, which is supposedly infallible, right? And so scientists and science had to fight them to establish reality. Whereas in India, there was no conflict between Dharma and Vijnana. There was no school of thought, that exclusively claimed truth only from their respective books. Books were claimed and used, of course, but they all gave precedence to pratyaksha pramana, which means direct perception. So the book cannot contradict direct evidence, right, or logical inference and so on. And so there was no conflict with science and reality. And I can illustrate that with a simple example from Vishnu Sahasrama, which is part of Mahabharata, which is approximately 5,000 years old. And the quote here says, Veda Sastrani Vijnanam Etat Sarvam Janardana, which is approximately Veda Shastran Vijnana, which is science, are all paths leading to the truth. So when they are all different paths leading to the truth, there is no conflict, right? And I wanted to give you a concrete example of Vijnana using astronomy. So in English or in the Western tradition, right, astronomy, astrology distinction itself is fairly recent, whereas it's much older in India. For astronomy was called Ganita Jyotisha, like mathematical Jyotisha, then Phalita Jyotisha, which is like Phala, which means astrology essentially. And the interesting thing is Vedic Jyotisha was focused on the so-called Dik Desha Kala Jnana, which means direction, place and time. That's it. Vedic Jyotisha had nothing to do with astrology, only astronomy, right? And you might reasonably ask, why do I care? And I'll give you 2 answers. First is, you get to connect with their heritage and learn about your ancestors' deep contributions to science, right? Non-trivial contributions to science. The second, more critical reason is that you get to understand modern science much more deeply compared to the current system. So we can actually do an experiment here, right? We have about 40 people. So how many here can explain why we say Earth is moving around the sun confidently? Please raise your hands. We have all been through the system. How many people can give me at least 3 reasons? If your child comes and asks you, right? Why do we say, we all say this is stated as a fact. How many of us can say that confidently today? You're not alone. You don't have to feel bad. I've asked this question to so many people, even at work. I work with really a lot of amazing engineers, right? And nobody pretty much knows, right? That's my point, right? And if you use Vijnana system, because it is organic, right? There is no jumps. You start at the one end of the spectrum and there is a continuity there. So you get to learn why each problem came, and you get a fairly deep understanding. And I don't want to make this into a science lecture, so we can talk about it later if we have time. But I want to give you something very concrete though, that you can grasp onto today. So the impact of this astronomical ignorance is this blind adoption of Christian Gregorian calendar, right? Now the calendar that we use today, it has a massive inbuilt error of 6 hours per year, right? That's a massive thing in astronomical terms. That's why every 4 years we have to add an extra day to make it leap year, right? And if you actually look at the calendar closely, a lot of funny things, happens. So September, for example, Septa is 7. September is the 9th month, right? Octa, like in October, is 8 everywhere, but only in October it's suddenly 10. Decca is 10 everywhere. December is 12 somehow, right? The reason for this randomness is, is Julius Caesar and I think Augustus Caesar, right? They both wanted to add full months to fix the errors that the calendar had with respect to reality, right? That's how bad the calendar is. And not only that, suddenly a month has 30 days, suddenly a month has 31 days, and then February has suddenly 29 days and 28 days. It's just random, right? Very badly done thing. And when you compare that to traditional Indian calendars, they are lunisolar calendars. What that means is it uses both the sun and the moon to figure out the calendar, so they are far more accurate. So to give you a context, right, Aryabhatta, in his Aryabhatiyam, 1500 years ago, had 1 year down to 7 decimal places. 7 decimal places. Think about that, right? So what have we done here? Let me give you an analogy. Let's say you have a beautiful statue, beautiful sculpture made of gold, pure gold in your house that has been handed on to you through the generations for 1500 years. And what you do is you just throw it away and then replace it with the ugly looking stone that somebody else gave you. That's what we have done here, right? And why have we done that? Exactly. And it's our astronomical ignorance, which is again because we don't study our own Vijnana. So I hope I have made a fairly strong case as to why we need to study Vijnana. It's immediately effective, you get to use a better system, and you get a far deeper understanding. Without deeper understanding, again, you cannot innovate. Now that concludes us 2 out of 5 in the IKS sampler. So here I just want to, I don't intend for anybody to read this. I just want to point out, this almost last 5,000 years, right? You had an amazing collection of work. All these are in the cataloged part, right, of whatever we saw here. If you look at the amazing variety, mathematics, public administration, prosody, philosophy, art, shipbuilding, and so on. Amazing set of works on mathematics and science that is available to all of us to take advantage of today. Right? And this is a continuous outpouring of major scholarly work, and this is what is IKS. All these things are our heritage, and we can take advantage of them. So moving on to the third topic is Panchakosha, but I wanted to introduce frameworks in the first place, right? Before I introduce Panchakosha framework. So the framework generally stays hidden, right? The framework under which questions are asked is actually a lot more important than the specific questions being asked, which in turn are a lot more important than the specific answer to those questions, right? Let me give you a quick example. Let's say I come to you and then ask you, hey, should I punch you on your left cheek or right cheek? Come on, quick, make a decision, right? The moment you answer that under my framework, what happens? Exactly. So you actually lose in 3 ways, right? First, you're going to get punched, either on your left cheek or right cheek, right? That's not going to be fun. The second thing that's going to happen is by answering my question within my framework, you have validated my question. The third thing, which is actually the most important of all, you have validated my right to ask you such questions and punish you or reward you, as the case may be. You have validated my framework. That's the key thing here. Frameworks are usually hidden. Questions and answers are more visible, right? So what I have done here is I have forced you into a binary framework, right? There are many such examples of this kind of binary or monoculture frameworks in the world, all around us. So for example, old, always inferior versus new, always better, progressive versus conservative, religion versus science. George Bush's infamous, you are either with us or against us statement, as if a random farmer in Africa can be for or against the United States, right? What childish thinking, right? Right? And if you ask me, hey, okay, I get asked this question, how do I answer this? I have a very interesting example for you. In 2022, India's Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar was asked this question, right? Interestingly, by an Indian origin person. If you are aware of the interview, why is India sitting on the fence on Ukraine war? Again, classic binary question, right? His answer was amazing. He said, I am not sitting on the fence just because I disagree with you. It means I'm sitting in my land or my ground. That's the framework busting answer that we should all have for these kind of binary questions, right? So I hope I have established the importance of frameworks with this slide, right? So with that, let me move on to the third topic of the IKS sampler, which is Panchakosha framework. Pancha basically means 5. Kosha literally is envelope or sheath, right? Panchakosha means 5 sheets. The key question we are trying to answer with this slide is, can you improve your well-being using this framework? And let me first introduce the Panchakosha framework before I attempt to make an answer or get to an answer. So first kosha is Annamaya kosha, which is your physical body. Next is Pranamaya kosha, which is your breath and senses and signaling systems. Third is Manomaya kosha, which is your emotional mental self. Fourth is Vijnanamaya kosha, which is your cognitive self. The last is Anandamaya kosha, which is your blissful self. So this is again one of those slides where I have made some big approximations. So any experts here, please forgive me. So Anandamaya kosha is an approximation here. So when I say blissful self, the first four I think are fairly obvious. The fifth one, let's say you are in very deep sleep. You are unaware of all your first four parts of your body or selves. Whatever self is there in your deep sleep is approximately Anandamaya kosha, right? And when I was actually discussing this slide with my older daughter, she said, Dad, this is exactly the issues that everybody is fighting with these days, right? And you can see how powerful the framework can be. Literally being overweight, fatigued, stressed, depressed, having learning issues, drug issues. These are all the modern problems that, lot of rich people and rich societies are fighting with, right? And, in the slide I've just listed just one simple way to keep each kosha healthy. But just understanding Panchakosha itself actually is a fairly detailed endeavor, right? I would guess it will at least take 6 months to get a reasonable understanding of it. So I don't want to get to the final thing, but my point is, if you were to have a deep understanding of Panchakosha framework, I guarantee you will be able to fix a lot of these issues at the root cause level. Not just that, you won't have to resort to any pharmacological, methods, and it won't break your bank, right? You wouldn't be making anybody else rich. You just will have more richness in your life. So now we are moving on to our fourth of the 5-part platter series, like intro series. So this one is going to be Sanskrit. Now you might be wondering what is this beautiful looking pot is doing over here, right? The reason for this slide is because the moment I say IKS and Sanskrit, a lot of people have this question, what does one has to do with the other, right? And that's the reason for this slide. So the beautiful part here is analogous to the Sanskritam language itself. Despite its beauty, its real purpose is to hold its content, which is IKS. Without the part, of course, IKS would have disappeared. So the part is important. But without IKS, the part will also be just an empty vessel, right? So both need to be preserved, both the language and its content. Otherwise, you won't be able to quench your thirst, so to speak. So with that out of the way, let me just touch on some major points on Sanskritam. Because there's a lot of content already on Sanskritam, a lot of organizations like Sanskrit Bharati, Vyoma, they are doing amazing work. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things and move on. So the very meaning of Sanskritam is Samyak Kritam iti Sanskritam. Well done, right? That's the meaning of Sanskritam. But all of us are calling it Sanskrit, right? And that itself is a clear show of our intellectual slavery. Actually, like a couple of years ago when I was at a party, an Indian origin guy came and introduced himself to me. He said, "Hi, I'm Vivek." And I was stunned for a minute, right? I didn't know I've never heard of that kind of a name. And he again said Vivek. Then it dawned on me. He's saying Vivek. Right? So he's starting to call himself Vivek because that's how other people are calling him. Right? He's turning himself into a pretzel to accommodate somebody else, right? That's the level of self-confidence that we have. He's not isolated, right? I can give many other examples of all of us, turning ourselves into pretzels because we don't have anyways. So, coming back from my rant there, so the so-called Sanskrit effect, right? That's a key thing parents should be aware of. So we have now, indisputable data that memorizing ancient mantras increases the size of the brain physically, right? Your cognitive part and your memory part. Both are very important for any kind of innovation that you want to do. And when I say mantras, right? So for example, can anybody guess what this mantra is? Just 5 random guesses, please. Which deity are we praising here, or what this topic is, and so on? Shikarmade, would you like to read?
Yeah. Dirgha chaturasra akshadaya rajjuhu parshvamanitirjagmani cha yat prathak bhute kuru tat ubhayam karoti.
Huh? Okay, very good guess. We have one guess. Can we get three at least, please? Three guesses. Shiva, okay, Shiva Suti, very good. One more guess, please. Just anything, like whatever occurs to you. There's no right or wrong answer. Relatively.
Is it sun?
Huh?
Sun?
Good guess, good guess. So, it's from Bodhana Sulabha Sutras. This is what it says. And it's actually the so-called Pythagorean theorem. So the moment people say, right, mantras, our mind is programmed to just go to the puja part, right? As I showed in the frame, the IKS overview slide, that's a tiny, tiny fraction, right, of the overall Sanskritam literature. So, okay, so now we are moving on to a final part of the 5-part sampler, IKS sampler, sustainability. So this is a so-called step well. Has anybody seen a step well in person? Wonderful. That's actually a much bigger percentage than I was expecting. Very good. So let me kind of give a background of why this was even needed in the first place. So India has, actually looks like we are running out of time. So let me quickly go to the point of this. So dharma by definition is sustainability, and that which sustains is dharma, right? The dharmic worldview, loka sangraha, is very important, right? That means the well-being of the entire world is considered before any major action. And unfortunately, in today's context, knowledge itself has become an enemy of the people, right? A power of atom is a great example there. And we essentially have 4 paths in front of us. So first is a religious path that basically says we own the earth. Human beings own the earth, everything on it. The second path is this capitalist path where nature is a capital to be exploited for economic gain. Third is a communist path, which looks at subjugation of nature as this great thing, right? Which is obviously not. All you have to do is look at Mao's 4-page campaign to see how horrible communism can be to nature. And finally, we have the dharmic path, where earth itself is called Bhudevi or Mother Earth, and sustainability and respect for nature is built in. This is the reason modern environmental movement itself started in India. Unfortunately, even here, right, we have a major discussion where people say it started with Rachel Carlson's book. We can talk about this later if we have time. And our choice now will have implications in our lifetime, right? Not 10 generations from now or 5 generations. Because if you look at our consumption over here, right, people, all of us in this room, if everybody in the world lived like us, we need 5 Earths. Literally 5 Earths. That's how unsustainable the current situation is, right? And if we don't correct ourselves, then the nature will do the job for us, right? And my point over here is that IKS, because it was deeply, the sustainability is built into the Indic systems themselves. If you go deeply into IKS, you'll be able to build sustainable products that is much needed in today's context. And that is another very important reason to study IKS in detail, because the entire concept of development versus nature doesn't exist in India. And finally, just a couple of slides. IKS is a treasure trove of knowledge, right? If we don't take initiative, somebody else will. The chart on the right basically shows you why. So here you have $107 billion worth of global yoga market just last year, right? Out of which just 5.6 billion is inside India, right? India and Hindus own a tiny portion of the world yoga market. And if you look at Indian iPhone exports, it's like tiny compared to the yoga market size, right? The unfortunate situation that we are in is that we own almost nothing of that, right? Who is going to control the narrative here? Psychologists are coming up with their own versions of branded yoga. There is something called Christian yoga and all kinds of things, right? If we don't take the initiative in IKS, this is going to get repeated a million times, right? And the other reason is, our inability to recognize existing innovations will lead to IP theft, intellectual property theft. And this is from Professor B. Mahadevan. And he gives a good and bad case. So US company was awarded a patent for neem as a pesticide, even though that has been used in India for thousands of years, right? And that's a negative case. The positive case is again USPTO granted a patent on the use of powdered turmeric. All our grandmothers have been using that for thousands of years, right? That got patented by a company and it got revoked, thankfully. So we have a good and the bad example here, and we obviously need to do work on IKS to replicate more of the success here. And with that, let me quickly go through our, what we are trying to do in this space. So we are launching this new organization called KSI, Knowledge Systems Incubator, to provide IKS education solutions for parents and educators to, obviously support our kids. And we are also an incubator to essentially enable entrepreneurs to build IKS products. And we already have established partnership with leading IKS institutions and content providers globally. And our objective is to solve the 4 problems that we looked at, right? Provide tools for parents, answers for kids, and then tools to address the systematic disadvantages, and then expose our kids to unique ways of thinking. And here again I want to repeat that when your kids get exposed to more ways of thinking, it's not going to replace anything they already have, right? It's going to give them an extra tool in the toolbox, right? That's going to help their ability to innovate. And we have established a new org, so we need to say why it is needed in the first place. So there are a lot of existing good organizations that that are doing great work. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. We'll work with them all. We'll focus on opportunities and gaps. So for example, there are a lot of resources of Vedanta and Gita, not much for Ganita and Vijnana. And we also need systematic, comprehensive toolkit for parents and kids, right? Because right now, if every parent is fighting this battle by themselves, just on an ad hoc basis, we need systematic toolkits to be able to provide our kids answers and so-called shields that they can use in hostile environment. And we also need systematic Purva-Paksha education, right? Let me define that word. Purva-Paksha means ability to understand your opponents as if you are them, right? Like you have to be able to have a deep empathetic understanding of their point of views. So for example, if a Christian comes to you and then says, why do you guys believe in this or that? Most of us don't even have an understanding of our own traditions first. The second thing is we have no clue, even less clue about their traditions, where they are coming from, what do they believe, right? We have very distorted view. So unless we have the detailed knowledge of both our side, which is what this is going to do, and the other side, right? For example, Christian perspective, Muslim perspective, capitalist perspective, communist perspective, and so on, a liberal perspective, and so on. Unless you understand their point of views, you might not agree with them, you might not like it, that doesn't matter, right? You have to understand that in the first place. If you just go into a silo, it's not going to help, right? That's a defensive strategy. You bury your head into the sand. It's actually a great strategy for ostrich. It's actually literally a great strategy for ostrich, right? To bury its head, because in its natural habitat, when ostrich does that, it resembles its background. It's a camouflage technique for an ostrich, not for us. And this is what most of us are doing, playing only defense. That will guarantee loss over the long term. And we also equally have to define what we will not do. That's another important thing. First thing we won't do is we won't entertain provably wrong or speculative ideas, right? Skype in Mahabharata, quantum physics in Vedas, gold from Mercury, these kind of stuff. I'll tell you why. So I don't know if any people recognize this picture here. This is actually a very famous Southern Indian picture, back in the day when color was first introduced to Indian cinema, right? And what this person, I have hidden their name and photo here. This is a tweet. I believe this was some BAV guy who said there was Skype in Mahabharata or something. And what this person did brilliantly is to mock that, right? So only this part is the tweet. And here is my comment. So what you see this person doing here is mocking that one moron's idea with our own stuff, right? So they are using our tools to beat us with. And this is what I'm calling adharmic forces, this person. So not the picture itself, right? I want to clarify. I actually personally like that movie. Adharmic forces will focus only on these kind of claims scribed during Mahabharata, and they'll try to paint everybody with the same brush, right, as equally invalid. Not doing our homework, right, hurts the cause of dharma. I sometimes tell my kids, right, with friends like these, who needs enemies? That is unfortunately what we have, right? These people are well intended, right? I understand. Like for example, there was this old person who was doing this gold from Mercury presentation, and he sincerely believed in what he presented. But any kid will ask him, "Hey, old man, if that is true, why don't you make India rich overnight?" Isn't that a logical question to ask, right? So these kind of stuff, it reeks of deep-seated, lack of scholarship and deep-seated inferiority complex, right? That is what we shouldn't do. The second thing KSI will not do is we will not try to make everything scientific, right? Say for example, I love my mother's dosa and sambar very, very much. There's absolutely no reason why I have to go and explain it to anybody, why I like it, why I would like to carry on that tradition, right? Zero reason to make it scientific. Because not everything worth knowing or doing has to be a science. It just doesn't. The same way, not every single tradition or convention needs explanation or justification. It's a convention. It exists even in math and science, right? And I see a lot of Hindus, even a lot of Hindu speakers trying to do this kind of justification, and this again reeks of the same two things: lack of deep scholarship and clear inferiority complex, right? And both of these need to be taken out if we want to be successful in our mission here. With that, let me move on to some IKS related products that are available today that you can make use of. So one is this preschool curriculum. All these products we'll be able to you'll be able to make use of through our partners Anadi Foundation. They are based in Parni in India, and if you run a preschool or if you are interested in running an Indic preschool, please contact us. We'll be able to facilitate and give you all the materials you need and also the training you need to get started with this through our partnership with Anadi Foundation. And Anadi also has this amazing set of books that you can buy today. For example, the Samskara or log book is an amazing way to inculcate Indic habits in your kids, right? Not just in your kids. So when I say 5+, it also applies to adults. Here you see, books that are applicable for 8+ ages. So these 6 set of books, for example, are amazing, books, right? I'm actually personally using them with my kids, 13 and 8. And my 8-year-old is actually already, reading these books by herself. She's not at a point where she really understands everything, but she's able to read it. She finds the material friendly enough that she's able to actually go through them, right? And these things, again, I wanted to stress, all of us will learn from this, adults also, right? And these 3 books, Yoga, Ayurveda, Nakshatra Adya, again, these are basics. They are intended for slightly older kids. 12+ is the recommended age, and amazing books, right? That even adults can use. And finally, for older men, mature kids, and definitely adults, this is the Panchakosha book, that I think I alluded to earlier, and the Indic Principles of Leadership. All these are amazing resources that you can use today to get started with the IKS. And here are a few IKS products in the pipeline that we are working on. So one thing, before I go into the details, all these things are work in progress, and if you are interested in any of these things, right, please get in touch with us. We'd be delighted to work with anybody who's having the same philosophy. Our philosophy is essentially promote IKS, right, like whatever I already mentioned earlier. So first is Indic preschool franchises, then Ganita-based products for children to inculcate love of math. Right now, math is beaten out of them, literally, right? They are forced to go through this horrible curriculum that filters out, makes most of them afraid of math. The third one is interactive media content to provide Indic alternative to Peppa Pig, Cocomelon, etc. And fourth and fifth are targeted at health and memory and learning. So here are the next set of activities that you can look forward to. So first is you could attend upcoming Anadi seminar series in November. We'll have a world-class researcher who is actually doing his PhD at IIT Bombay, and he's also a director at Anadi Foundation. His research is at the intersection of Ganita, computer science, and mathematics, right? Um, and he is going to be here in person. So he will give you a lot of examples of how you can do cutting edge research and innovate today with Ganita. Then we're planning a series of offerings for different age groups. There's 8 to 15-year-olds. We're going to have weekend Ganita and Vijnana classes. For 16 plus years old, older kids and maybe young adults, seminars on being Hindu in the United States. And finally, Hindu parenting series for people interested in that. And the Indic humanities part, that's our long-term goal, right? We've started work on it, but that's going to be a while, maybe 6 months to a year. So the objective is to start at the elementary school level, go all the way till undergraduate level, right? And provide Indic views on humanities, right? That will act as a shield. That is going to be the comprehensive work that I mentioned earlier. That will be the tool that both parents and children can use. And once you finish it, you will not only know your tradition in a solid way, but you will also have Purva-Paksha knowledge. So that will be the comprehensive shield that you need to have the confidence to go deal with the outside world. And finally, definitely get connected with us. If you have any ideas at all, any of these ideas or anything else related to IKS that you would like to work with us on, we are really interested in incubating IKS startups. So please get in touch with us. I've thrown a lot of things at you today, right? And I just wanted to kind of take a step back and use this beautiful shell as an example. Can anybody guess why I have the shell here? Beautiful guess, okay.
The outside.
Sorry?
We just took a look at the outside. We didn't really go.
Very, very good guess. Yeah, go ahead.
Galaxy, it represents the universe.
Beautiful guess, yeah. Actually, this is, I think all of these make sense. So here, right, let us say we start at this red dot here. And you are at this stage where you say, I don't know, and I don't know that I don't know, right? You're ignorant, but you're also ignorant about your ignorance, right? And then you get to a stage where I know I don't know, but I'm okay, I don't care, right? Then you get to a stage that, your knowledge doesn't change between steps 2 and 3, right? You still don't know. But in step 2, you are totally okay with your ignorance. In step 3, you begin to question yourself. Am I really okay, right? Then you get to a point, man, I need to know this, right? That's the beautiful stage you got to get to, right? Once you are at stage 4, the stage 4 is beautiful because learning happens there, right? You get to this hello dot, but then it doesn't stop there. Then there is another thing that you don't know that you don't know, and it keeps going, right? That's the spiral we're talking about. So all of us are somewhere in this path. And it's an infinite path, right? Knowledge is infinite. It doesn't matter where we are. As long as we are in one of these 4 steps, we will be in a good path. So it doesn't matter if a specific concept we discussed today, it didn't make sense, any of those things, right? The big picture here is as long as you are somewhere in this spiral, you are okay. You just have to continue to learn. One thing I want to caution is that there is a extra step, like outside step, where I really don't know, but I'm somehow convinced that I do. Right? In that case, no learning happens. Right? That's an unfortunate case where I find a lot of us are in. Right? If I go ask a random Hindu, hey, what do you know about? I actually did this with my extended family, right? When I was in India last year, I asked them, what do you actually know about cosmology? It's just a random, I don't know what subject, I use some modern subject. And they all frankly admitted, I don't know anything about that. Then I asked them, what do you know about Gita? They all knew. Or they all said whatever they thought Gita said, right? Bhagavad Gita. And when I asked them, have you actually read the book? Not one did. Not one of them. That is the level of ignorance. But they're all convinced they know Bhagavad Gita. Right? So all of us, we have this impression, just because we are Indian or we are calling ourselves Hindu, we think we know what India is, or we think we know what Hinduism is. As long as we're not kidding ourselves, then learning can happen. But as long as we continue to deny the fact of our own ignorance, we will not learn. So that's the last thought I wanted to leave you with. And with that, I can take any questions.
Maybe we can leave
Um,
questions for the
oh,
end
yeah,
after
okay.
Abhijit's presentation.
You can announce it now.
So, thank you very much, Anandji. What we're going to do is hold off on the questions until Amiji's presentation is done. All right? Is that okay? All right.